All right, so welcome. This is the first episode of Mindhunter Season 1. I'm going to be spending some time looking into the psychology of the main characters from the show, which are Holden, Tench, and Wendy. And then we might spill over into some other characters during that time as well. And we'll go episode by episode. So let's start out with Season 1, Episode 1. In the first scene of the show, we see Holden come to the negotiation standoff, and we're seeing the cops yelling at this man who's holed up inside of a building with a woman. And the cop is yelling, but he's also yelling into a megaphone, and so it's amplifying his voice, making everything more aggressive and oppositional to the man inside the building. And he's demanding that this man change what he's doing, or that something really bad's going to happen to him. They're not trying to understand him at all, and they're just making him do what they want him to do. But when Holden comes in, he's understanding, he's empathetic, he's speaking softly, he's trying to know who this person is, and it's almost like he's getting towards that reference that the man makes about you can't shoot what you can't see, and that the cops don't actually see him, that he's invisible, and Holden's trying to make him visible through his understanding and empathy with him.
Yes, I can see you.
What do you see?
I can see that you're naked. I can see that you're cold.
Holden asks for the reporters to leave. He asks for the snipers to back off. He wants to try to make this man as comfortable as possible, whereas the cops were making him extremely uncomfortable. We're getting an introduction to Holden and how he operates in a very clinical manner, but in a very understanding manner as well, where he's trying to get inside the mind of these men and criminals and really find out what makes them tick. And to do that, you cannot oppose them. You have to align with them somehow. We soon see his apartment, and it's evident that this is a guy who doesn't have a whole lot else going on in his life except for work. There's really nothing in there. There's no food in the refrigerator. It's a model apartment, and he's sitting there by himself. Maybe this is part of the reason he is so obsessed, or it's an outcome of his obsession, is that everything else goes to the wayside and all focuses on what he does. When he's teaching his class a little later, he talks about the need to understand and not dominate the other person, and it's associated with what he was just doing in that conversation with the man in the building. But it's a very therapeutic approach. He's talking about the importance of listening, of seeing what they need and what they require, and not putting our own wishes upon them. It makes you wonder, how is this guy going about this without having a psychology background or without being a psychologist himself? It's almost like he learned it in an organic way somehow. But when he's talking to the class, everybody leaves as soon as the bell rings, and he's left talking to himself. And so we see a man who's on his own and is really seeing things from his perspective, and nobody else has seen it that way. They might be interested, but not really of much importance.
The world barely makes any sense, so it follows that crime doesn't either.
Listen, you and I could theorize all night long, but the truth is, I don't fucking know.
I don't know either.
No one does.
Holden talks to the other professor from the FBI, and they talk about the lack of meaning in the world and how nothing really makes sense anymore, and maybe the killing is a symptom of that. But he also mentions at one point, there's no more just the facts, ma'am, and that we can't base things off of old cop shows and reruns, as they put it. And it's partially speaking to the way that you can't just follow things logically all the time. The FBI seems like a place where everything is straight and orderly and logical, but that much of what's going on now does not operate that way. and that you must think outside of the box and find new ways to explore what's going on, which might include a lot of emotional issues that people are dealing with, which is not logical in the least. We're seeing through Holden's viewing of Dog Day Afternoon and his continuing conversations with his supervisor that he's very forward and progressive thinking. He's unlike other people that he's surrounded by, and he's trying to see what we can do differently to work with these people. He talks to his boss about getting access to information about the psychology, and the boss says, well, we have stuff from 5 years ago, and Holden's saying that's not recent enough. And he's getting at the point that they're kind of stuck in the past there, and that he's one of the few who's moving forward and seeing what they can do differently. It's also interesting to see Holden interact with different parts of the culture at this time, including his soon-to-be girlfriend, and then the first professor he interacts with when he goes to Charlottesville. And they're both part of the counterculture that's prevalent at that time. They view criminality and kind of what's going on in society as a reaction to certain institutions like the FBI or other organizations who are trying to put people into boxes and strangleholds that are not normal or are not natural. And so they have a deep distrust and fear of people like Holden who are working for those institutions, which might be part of the reason that these criminals are flourishing at that time. Then as the episode progresses, we see why Holden doesn't really want to be a professor and why it's very limiting to him. Not only does he have a bunch of students who are stuck in their ways and wanting to go about these hostage situations, kind of like how the cops were at the beginning of the episode. He also has his supervisor who's sort of micromanaging him and watching over his shoulder and not really giving him the room to breathe and to figure things out on his own.
I guess I'm busy working my way sideways.
You are what they call a blue flamer. You know what that is?
No, what does that mean?
You're so eager to do good, you have a big blue flame shooting out of your asshole.
Holden is finally introduced to Tench, and we see how this is a perfect pairing because Tench is the laid-back, more relaxed guy that Holden needs. And we can immediately see how Holden eases up a little bit when he's talking to him. But Holden also needs Tench because Tench is the one who's talking to police departments and is out in the field and is seeing what's going on in the present moment. And that's exactly what Holden needs to be doing. He can't be stuck in the past. He needs to be on the ground, figuring things out for himself. Holden soon goes with Tench to an instructional meeting with sheriffs or the cops in another town. And we see how Holden is not on the same wavelength as a lot of these other people, and especially the cops. They're thinking in those backward terms that he's trying to get away from with the FBI. And when he brings up ideas about philosophers and Dostoevsky and Freud and how these are actually interesting and involved topics that we're trying to deal with in dealing with these types of killers, people just can't understand it. They're not on that level with him. So he's intellectually distancing himself from them by talking about some of these subjects. He then tries a different tactic by bringing Manson into the conversation and essentially trying to have the people there understand Manson and empathize with him a little bit so that they can see past their limiting understanding of what he is or who he is. And this completely turns everybody off.
Look at those eyes. How can you not say that dude's evil?
that's a little bit Old Testament, don't you think? Good, evil, black, white, it's easy. But who in this room has a life that's easy?
What he's trying to do is have them ask questions. Like he says, he wants them to explore this more. We need to figure out things. Whereas what the cops and many other people have done is they have reduced the person and what's going on to a definition, and it's all that it can be. And so this is the problem with anybody who's closed-minded versus an open-minded person, is that there's no other possibility than what you know. And so you end up staying with that possibility and not letting yourself venture out further. But what we're going to find in this episode and throughout is that Holden is that man who is venturing out and onward, seeking out what other people are afraid to do and are not willing to do. And when he later talks to the former LAPD detective, we see how these cases and what's going on really impacts people to their core and is destroying people in some sense. And maybe that's part of the reason that they aren't willing to go out further and explore, because it makes them question their beliefs and what they might think about the world and God and other big questions. And that's not something most people are willing to deal with or to question. And so it's better to stick with what you know, even if that causes you to be closed-minded and shut a lot of possibilities out of the picture. And then at the end of the episode, even with Tench, we see that he is actually in the same mind state as many of the police and other people that Holden will deal with in this series. Tench is not, even though he proposes to be that open-minded about some of the things they're looking into, and you can see with the anger that he explodes with, he's not fully on board. And so that will produce some great tension in the show. So that's it for Mindhunter Season 1, Episode 1. Look forward to the next one. Thank you for watching.